Interest rate cut to 5%. On the occasion of the state visit to Singapore by Vietnamese State President Trần Đại Quang from August the 28th to the 30th, Crosstalk this week will be dedicated to an overview of economic ties between Vietnam and Singapore. Hello and welcome to this edition of BizLine brought to you by VTV International. You with me, Lina Pham. And as usual, we'll start our show by reviewing several highlights of the economic scenes during the past week. The Ministry of Planning and Investment has announced a draft plan on economic restructuring until 2020, which would cut interest rates to 5%, equivalent to that of other developing countries. The plan pointed out a number of problems in terms of banking and currency policies, such as the raising of chartered capital not meeting expectations, limited financial power of domestic investors, and slow capital degradation. Solutions to these problems include the comprehensive amendment of laws and regulations. The Vietnam Asset Management Company might be ordered to buy banking bad debts at market prices to completely eradicate bad debts from bank balance sheets. The first half of this year also saw capital prioritized for trade and manufacturing sectors, according to a recent statement by the State Bank of Vietnam. More than $400 million were allocated for loans on these sectors, including some $130 million as preferential loans for super small-sized enterprises and about $70 million for supporting startups. According to the State Bank of Vietnam, stricter rules on the security of capital for medium and long-term loans, as well as loans for real estate projects, have urged banks to be more prudent. Loans for small and medium-sized enterprises have reached 22% of total outstanding loans this year, up from 20% last year. Foreign direct investment, or FDI, of about $14.4 billion was registered for new and existing projects in Vietnam so far this year, according to the Foreign Investment Agency under the Ministry of Planning and Investment. This was an 8% increase year-on-year. Over 1,600 new projects with foreign investment were granted licenses during the period, with capital amounting to nearly $10 billion, up nearly 25% year-on-year. Another $4.6 billion was added to operating projects, some 16% lower than last year's corresponding period. Samsung SDS, a subsidiary of the South Korean Samsung Group, will invest in Vietnam's aviation sector, the Korea Herald reported, through a joint venture with Aviation Logistics Corporation, which currently operates at the cargo terminal at Nội Bài International Airport. Samsung SDS will be in charge of logistics services, including domestic transportation, international, and warehousing service. According to the company, Vietnam's logistic market has seen 15 to 20% growth per year. A plan is now underway to build a casino in Vân Đồn district of northern Quảng Ninh province. The project is now waiting for new mechanisms to be implemented so that Vietnamese people can play in a casino right in Vietnam, which previously was impossible. The locality has prepared and is now ready to implement the project. The Vân Đồn Airport, now under construction, planned to come into operation in 2018. The airport is just one of the investment projects, along with the casino complex project by Sun Group, who is waiting for a government decree on casinos. In the rest of the world, the casino business has become a cash cow that generates a lot of money. It is the casino business that turned Las Vegas into the kingdom of gambling games and Macau into Asia's gambling capital. According to the Ministry of Finance, the total revenue of gambling businesses in 2014 was $61.8 million, contributing over $15 million to the state budget. We have just reviewed some of the economic highlights during the past week. Up next, we'll talk about the economic potential between Vietnam and Singapore in our crosstalk. Relations between Singapore and Vietnam have grown from strength to strength since the two countries established bilateral diplomatic relations on August 1, 1973. For the first 8 months of 2016, Singapore has grown to become the third biggest investor in Vietnam out of 116 countries and territories in the world. To learn more about the Vietnam-Singapore's economic potential, I have sat down with Mr. Sek Yi Chung, Vice President of the Singapore Business Group in Vietnam. But before we start our discussion, let's take a look at the following clip to have an overview about investment from Singapore in Vietnam so far. Singapore is Vietnam's second largest trade partner in ASEAN and ranks 8th in the world. Two-way trade turnover reached $16.22 billion in 2015. The total registered capital of FDI from Singapore reached over $37.9 billion. For the first 5 months of 2016, FDI from Singapore to Vietnam reached $907.1 million, making Singapore the third largest foreign investor among over 116 countries and territories that have invested in Vietnam. Singapore's FDI inflows are mainly focused in the processing and manufacturing sectors, with a total registered capital of $16.1 billion, accounting for 44.3% of the total FDI from Singapore to Vietnam. FDI in real estate reached $10.9 billion, accounting for 30% of the total Singaporean FDI into Vietnam. The Vietnam-Singapore Industrial Parks, or VSIP, in Bình Dương, Bắc Ninh, Hải Phòng, and Quảng Ngãi are an example of the two countries' economic cooperation. Ho Chi Minh City is attracting the most FDI from Singapore with $9.75 billion, accounting for 26.7% of total registered capital in Vietnam. Hanoi ranks second with $4.65 billion, accounting for 12.8% of registered capital. Bắc Ninh, Đồng Nai, Thái Nguyên, and Bà Rịa Vũng Tàu provinces have also recently been attracting more FDI projects from Singapore. Thank you very much, Mr. Sek Yi Chung, for joining our Bizline program.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Due to the most recent statistic, Singapore has ranked second in terms of investment into Vietnam. So what do you think about this trend?
I think this trend will continue because Singapore is a place that has, we could say, has the capital, there's human talent, but let's face it, geographically it's rather small. Okay, whereas Vietnam has huge amount of opportunities, has a lot of potential that is being explored, and that can continue to be explored. It could be anything on the agriculture side. It could be a base for manufacturing, but more and more we will see Vietnam moving up the value chain as well, and the type of investors that will come to Vietnam would reflect that. So we're looking at services sector, logistics, and of course when we talk about Singapore, they are particularly well known for real estate. So it could be mixed use commercial developments. But what's also touching closer to home for the Vietnamese is all these condominium projects. I think the general population has been more accustomed to saying that, we want to live on land, we want a villa, and it took a while I think for the population to better understand and appreciate what a full service condominium can actually offer to them. So I think these are the different kind of opportunities that Vietnam presents, and the kind of opportunities that I'm sure the Singapore companies will continue to explore.
So can you explain the reasons why Singaporean investors are interested in investing in Vietnam?
Vietnam has demonstrated over time that it has sort of good economic, political stability. Certainly the population growth in Vietnam is something of an envy for the Singaporeans. So what you have, is a society, it's an economy of up and coming, aspiring young people, middle class, and discerning and wanting better quality goods and services. So I think that's where the Singaporean investors would position themselves to say that yes, we do have our economic history and success through a lot of hard work. We have developed some brands and products that we believe that will appeal to the part of the Vietnamese consumer that's increasingly discerning for quality.
What are the major headline deals of investment from Singaporean companies into Vietnam?
Well, it's all anything to do with land and real estate. Yeah. So it's anything as historical as the Vietnam-Singapore Industrial Park that has been in Vietnam and creating the platform for manufacturing for a very long time. Saigon Center that recently reopened, with anchor tenant Takashimaya, Mapletree's, recent acquisition of Kumho Asiana, Capital Land Projects, Ascendus, and Logistics. So I think these are the projects that have caught the attention of observers, and I think there will be more projects to come. There will be challenges as well, getting access to location. There's a lot of strong competition there as well, and it's not just it's not really just the foreign players. I think a lot of domestic developers have definitely planted that flag in that space as well. But I think at the end of the day, what it creates is just it's healthy competition. We'll literally see a changing landscape. And somewhere along the way, we hope to see as well, some conservation efforts on the part of the government. It's nice to create a beautiful, gleaming new cities, but there's so much, beautiful heritage that should be preserved as well.
In 1994, Singaporean real estate company Capital Land was one of the first international developers to enter Vietnam. After over 20 years of operation, the company currently owns over 8,000 homes and 1,800 apartment units in 4 major cities in Vietnam.
When we decided to invest in a country, we look at a few things. First thing, actually, whether the country politically stable. So Vietnam is very stable. Second, we look at its population. Do you have a big enough population? Vietnam, again, they got 91 million people. The next thing you look at the growth, the GDP growth, is it healthy? I think Vietnam consistently doing well.
Theo tôi thì là cái Singapore họ là một nước rất là mạnh trong lĩnh vực phát triển bất động sản, và những trên đất nước Singapore có rất nhiều những cái sản phẩm bất động sản rất là nổi tiếng, và do đó mà tôi nghĩ rất là tốt nếu mà họ đưa những cái sản phẩm tương tự như vậy họ xây dựng ở Việt Nam, thì chúng ta cũng có nhu cầu là phát triển cái bất động sản chúng ta lên một cái tầm mức mới để đưa cái gọi là các cái dịch vụ về khách sạn, về du lịch của chúng ta lên một cái tầm cao mới.
Hotel is also another option that is attracting Singaporean investors. Bay Hotel Singapore is an example. The company opened its Bay Hotel Ho Chi Minh branch in the first quarter of 2016.
We believe that being in the hotel industry, we can cater to more of these segmentation, like the corporate guests who here travelers. We have a lot of travelers from Singapore, from Malaysia to Asia. So we believe that being a Singapore-based company and opening a Singapore-named hotel, we are bound to have a more better feeling to our locals who come over here from Asia, to have the same feeling that they experience at our hotel, a flagship hotel in Singapore itself.
According to Vietnam Investment Review, 5 out of 10 Singaporean businesses investing in Vietnam are in the real estate sector. Big names in the sector are Capital Land, with the notable M&A deal of the Empire City real estate project, worth of $264 million. Mapletree Investments with the M&A deal of the Kumho Asiana Plaza, worth of $215 million.
So besides the real estate, what are the trends of Singaporean investment into Vietnam? In what sector?
Okay, besides real estate, then of course anything probably do with, it could be logistics, it could be port operations, and financial services. It could be, food and beverage products. It could be healthcare products. It could be restaurants. Vietnamese and Singaporeans and a common love for food. And interestingly enough, the Vietnam's WTO commitments to require a foreign investor in a restaurant to also build a hotel, well, that condition has fallen away. So foreign investors are able to set up 100% foreign-owned restaurants.
Besides the real estate sector, Singaporean investors are also eyeing the agricultural sector, food and consumer products in Vietnam. Wilmar International formed a joint venture worth $25.8 million with Saigon Union of Trading Cooperative to produce fish sauces and spices. In March 2016, the Singaporean government bought 27.6 million shares of Masan Group Corporation to increase its stake from 1.38% to 5.08%. Olam Spices and Vegetables expanded their 2 agricultural processing plants in Gia Lai and scaling up their factories in Ho Chi Minh City.
So in your opinion, what are the challenges that Vietnam has to overcome in order to attract more investment from Singapore?
We are talking about 2 different countries, each of its own system, each of its own history. And there are times when, gaps have to be identified. They will be there, and to see how we can actually bridge those gaps. Singaporeans and Singapore businesses, they take pride in being very organized and very managed, and we can tick the boxes, we can follow the process, we put a lot of thought to it, we have intelligent folks at it, and certainly again there's value to it, but when you try to bring that to Vietnam, you're probably going to find that there's going to be a difference. It could be that your local party may not be as organized, may not be as prepared. And then again, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's where you probably find synergies. Perhaps your local partner is someone that wants to have and is trying to improve on their own system. But of course, what the local partner can bring could be resources, assets, sheer land size that Singapore does not have. There are different styles, there are different approaches, there are certainly different laws, and I think that kind of those gap in expectations have to be identified, and I think they have to be managed.
In terms of the legal framework, do you think what needs to be improved to help protect Singaporean investors in Vietnam?
Vietnam has been working very hard in actually evolving its legal framework to make it more modern, to be a bit more robust, and actually to make it more transparent. So last year they introduced the new investment law and enterprise law, and made certain changes to the licensing process. After 1 year in its implementation, and in fairness, of course, procedures take time to be worked out, but in fairness, I think it has worked rather well. Where the business activities that the foreign investor wants to do is if it's pretty regular, pretty conventional. It could be manufacturing, it could be software services. Then it's not going to be problematic. It's very facilitated. Things can move along quite quickly. However, if the investor is trying to go into a business line or a service sector for which Vietnam didn't expressly open its doors for, whether it's through the WTO or AEC, then that is subject to a lot more scrutiny, is subject to more questions, and then of course that takes more time.
Founded in 2007, the Vietnam-Singapore Industrial Park, or VSIP in Bắc Ninh Province, to date had attracted $1.61 billion in accumulative foreign direct investment, or FDI, contributing 14% of provincial FDI. Over 40 firms have the facilities based in this VSIP, including giants such as Microsoft, PepsiCo, and Unilever.
Đây là nhà đầu tư khu công nghiệp rất là chuyên nghiệp, tuân thủ chặt chẽ các cái luật về xây dựng, về môi trường, mang đến một cái tư duy mới cho những cái quản lý người Việt của chúng ta được học hỏi. Họ cũng đã góp phần đưa cái thương hiệu tỉnh Bắc Ninh lan tỏa đến toàn cầu.
VSIP Bắc Ninh is one among 7 VSIPs across Vietnam, including Bình Dương, Bắc Ninh, Hải Phòng, Quảng Ngãi, Hải Dương, and Nghệ An provinces. Started 20 years ago, VSIPs are regarded as an enduring symbol of the long-standing bilateral economic cooperation between the two nations.
Chúng tôi đương cùng với các bạn Singapore làm việc để chuyển cái mức độ hợp tác lên mức độ cao hơn. Bây giờ là thay vì là chỉ là Industry Park thì họ sẽ có Innovation Park. Họ đương thúc đẩy cái khu công nghiệp sáng tạo đấy ở tại thành phố Hà Nội và tại thành phố Hồ Chí Minh, có thể xem xét mở ra ở thành phố Đà Nẵng.
VSIPs have attracted over 600 customers from 23 countries worldwide. To date, they have attracted a total investment of $7.8 billion in capital, while creating about 160,000 jobs.
Vietnam is integrating very deeply into the global economy, for example, participating in the AEC and TPP. So how does that change the view of Singaporean investors into Vietnam?
I think by and large, it sends out good signals. It sends out a signal that that you're open for business. It sends out a signal that you're trying to modernize your economy, and these are all healthy signs. And I mean, you see that with the continuous integration that's part of the AEC effort, U.S.-Vietnam bilateral trade agreement in 2000, then several years ago WTO accession. So whether it's a Singaporean investor or any foreign investor looking at these, it does send out the right signals. And certainly for Vietnam to sign to the TPP, again, all very good signs. But beyond that, what investors and businesses look out for is to see, how is Vietnam actually implementing its commitments. I mean, it's one thing to sign a document, it's another thing to deliver. And some of these agreements, do require Vietnam to take a closer look at its own laws and systems to put in the necessary reforms. And I think some of it has, done well. I think customs procedures is something that, the continuous effort to improve it. But there's some areas, especially around, again, market access for some of business activities, which are perhaps not something that was specifically contemplated before, and then that leads to more questions.
What do you think about the investment inflow from Vietnam to Singapore? Especially, there are many Vietnamese want to study in Singapore.
In terms of services, that's absolutely right. Somewhere along healthcare and education, again, it's an area that Singapore businesses and investors can look at for opportunities. In fact, I do believe that if you look at the surveys at what your general Vietnamese consumer would spend on, I think always ranking very high would be anything to do with sort of healthcare and wellness related, and also education. It's interesting to think about Vietnam going outbound. Right now, and I think Vietnam still looks like an investment destination, which is good. It's a place that has opportunities. You could manufacture to export. It's a place and population that continues to demand quality goods and services. So yeah, I think it should continue to play up that strength. But at the same time, you can see, your homegrown champions, domestic companies that have just gotten stronger. They are also looking at opportunities outside Vietnam. They are looking to expand their market, and I think that, for example, phở bò, the Vietnamese beef noodle, it's a name and a dish that's already very well known. You go from Australia, Singapore to Canada, everybody knows what a phở bò is. Vietnamese words, Vietnamese cuisine, they do transcend borders, as it should. Vietnamese patients would look outside Vietnam for their services. Service providers outside Vietnam would start looking in to see whether they can come closer to the market. And you probably see that out of education as well. And I think it's really excellent that there's a lot of Vietnamese students that have studied and continue to study in Singapore. It just helps to create a stronger bridge.
According to statistics by the European Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, every year about 40,000 Vietnamese spend nearly $1 billion for treatment abroad. Hoa, a Vietnamese, is waiting for a checkup in a Singaporean hospital.
Nếu đã không khám ở Việt Nam thì em muốn chọn một cái đất nước nào đó gần và chất lượng y tế phải tốt để kiểm tra tổng quát sức khỏe của gia đình trong một năm luôn.
Mount Elizabeth Hospital in Singapore receives the largest number of Vietnamese patients with 200 people per day.
Phần lớn bệnh nhân đến các bệnh cảnh phức tạp như điều trị các bệnh ung bướu, tim mạch hay là những can thiệp lớn. Nhưng 5 năm trở lại đây thì cũng ghi nhận là có một cái làn sóng bệnh nhân đi để chữa bệnh, không chỉ đi để chữa bệnh, giảm đi mà lại có tăng lên là bệnh nhân đi để khám sức khỏe.
Foreseeing the high demand of Vietnamese people going to Singapore for medical treatment, Singaporean investors have approached the medical field in Vietnam to make their service closer to Vietnamese people. Hoan Mỹ Medical Corporation received investment from Singaporean investors via a M&A deal worth nearly $32 million. Parkway Health Group established a joint venture called Hoa Lam Shangri-La in 2008 to develop the first high-tech medical zone in Bình Chánh District, Ho Chi Minh City. The Thompson Medical Center Limited signed a cooperation agreement with Hạnh Phúc Hospital. This sector is predicted to have a lot of room to grow.
What's your prediction of the future trends in terms of growth in investment and business activities between Vietnam and Singapore?
The partnership between Singapore and Vietnam should only grow stronger over time. Again, there's a lot of synergies that that can be found for both sides. I also feel that when there are more countries that that have trade and investment with each other, and I'm talking about the intra-ASEAN trade, it does help to make that grouping stronger as well. And we know that the ASEAN nations are really diverse in terms of size, economy, population, politics. And I think the more commonality that they find with each other, the more that they do business with each other, the more there's human mobility between these nations, then it's going to be a stronger boat. So and I feel that Vietnam and Singapore can play a very integral role for that purpose.
Once again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
The economic cooperation between Singapore and Vietnam is broadened under the context of free trade agreements formed in the ASEAN Economic Community, or the AEC, as well as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the TPP. To make the most of the two countries' economic potential, Vietnam needs to improve its investment environment, streamline procedure times, and identify gaps between the two countries in order to solve the differences. This also wraps up this edition of BizLine. Thank you very much for watching. You can always rewatch our program at vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go. From our team here in Hanoi, until next time.